Hello everyone, I'm DMind, the mind of one and all, and welcome to an episode of DMind Talks. This is a thing that I might do every now and then, when I feel like it, or when there's something that I really want to talk about. It's basically just me sitting in front of a mic and talking about a certain topic, so yeah, I hope you guys enjoy it. Anime, a media of entertainment that we all know and love, and if you don't love anime, well, what are you doing watching this video in the first place? Anime has only ever started to become popular by the mid-80s to the late 90s, and have exploded in popularity ever since. However, the very term anime for this great form of media is flawed, and here's why. Now, when I say anime, what kind of shows immediately comes to mind? Perhaps One Piece, Death Note, Kill la Kill, and so on. Now, when I say cartoon, what kind of shows immediately comes to mind? Perhaps SpongeBob, Tom and Jerry, The Simpsons, and so on. Now let's try something a bit more tricky. Avatar: The Last Airbender. Anime or cartoon? Go on, answer it. I'm waiting. Wait, what's that? I can't hear you over this video. Well, whatever the case, what about what I think? Is Avatar: The Last Airbender anime or cartoon? Personally, I like to think it's very much like an anime in terms of its art style and animation, and it's no doubt that it took at least some inspiration from anime. However, officially I know for a fact that Avatar: The Last Airbender is not an anime, and let me explain why. Now, before anything, we first need to go into the history of anime and cartoons. Yes, the time was the early 1900s, with the rise of TV and motion picture, when Walt Disney and his team created one of the first and most iconic cartoon in the form of a mouse. Yes, this little guy. Mickey Mouse, which first debuted in Steamboat Willie 1928, became popular worldwide and set the standard for cartoons around the world. Cartoon shows since then became known as a show for all ages, but generally appealed more to kids, so naturally, they became the target audience later on. Now, I know we have shows like Family Guy and South Park, which is aimed more for adults, but back then, shows like these don't really exist, and cartoons were known as a family-friendly show that appealed more to kids. However, things were a bit different in Japan. Back in the 1900s, Japan does have their own cartoons, although at the time, most of their cartoons looked something like this. Yeah, you could tell that there was some influence from Western cartoons before it eventually evolved into something like this. However, Japanese animators had trouble competing with foreign producers such as Disney, since these foreign cartoons are already successful abroad, and so they could be sold for even less than the price domestic producers need to charge in order to break even. And so Japanese animators had to work cheaply in small companies with only a handful of employees. However, this had its own set of problems, as this would mean that the overall quality of the cartoons would be poor compared to foreign cartoons made by bigger studios with a bigger budget. Yeah, you could tell Japanese animators had it pretty rough back then. In fact, you could argue they still kinda do to some extent in this day and age. And with such competition, you would expect the animation industry in Japan to die sooner or later. However, that wasn't the case. It was not until World War II and the events leading up to it that Japan started to control its media and censoring foreign media while encouraging its own. This gave the Japanese producers the break they needed, and with the support of the government to promote Japanese nationalism, the animation industry in Japan was back again. So I guess there were some good things to come out of World War II, as we might not have anime as we know it in this day and age. Thanks, Hitler, I guess. Anyway, soon after the events of World War II with the revival of the animation industry in Japan, a certain animation studio emerged, known as Toei Animation. Yes, Toei Animation, the studio that later produced some of the most popular and well-known animes of all time, being One Piece, Sailor Moon, and freaking Dragon Ball. Toei Animation played a huge role in the development of anime to the style that we know of. Yes, they were largely responsible for animations looking like this, evolving to animation looking like this in Japan, as Toei Animation encouraged animators to bring their own style and ideas to the production, which resulted in one of the first animation of its kind that would set the standard for animation in Japan. The Great Adventure of Horus, Prince of the Sun, which created a movement for progressive animation that involved Mamoru Oshii, most notably known for directing Ghost in the Shell later on, and Hayao Miyazaki. Yes, the Hayao Miyazaki, co-founder of Studio Ghibli and director of Spirited Away and My Neighbor Totoro. Another major role that Toei Animation played was introducing the development of a cost-cutting method of animation that allows for emphasis to be placed on important shots by animating them with more detail than the rest of the work, which would become more prominent in most modern anime and allowed domestic producers to compete with foreign producers, unlike before. This new and unique form of progressive animation made us differentiate it from normal cartoons, and we then decided to call this unique style of animation anime, which is the Japanese word for animated show or cartoon show, and the comics done in this style, manga, which again is the Japanese word for comic book. Yes, so if I show a cartoon like Fairly Odd Parents to a Japanese person, they would say it's an anime, while if I showed them an Archie comic or a Garfield comic to a Japanese person, they would say it's a manga. However, what if we had not used the Japanese word for cartoon? What would we have called anime? How would we differentiate it from cartoons like Mickey Mouse? Technically speaking, they are both the same thing. Both are animated shows, so they are both cartoons. So we most likely would have instead called it Japanese cartoons and Japanese comics by adding the country of origin in order to differentiate it. Kinda like how we differentiate K-pop with normal pop. And that is essentially the meaning of anime and manga, Japanese cartoons and Japanese comics. So with that, let us jump back and answer a previous question. Is Avatar The Last Airbender a cartoon or an anime? As much as Avatar adapts this style of progressive animation that we differentiate from cartoons, it is not a Japanese cartoon, or in other words, anime. It was made in North America by North Americans, meaning it's a cartoon. Instead of defining anime based on its unique style and form of animation, which is why we differentiated it in the first place, we instead defined it by its country of origin. Which means a show like Avatar is technically a cartoon, while something like this is technically an anime. Yes, this clay animation is technically an anime. Why? Because it's an animation made in Japan, which means it's an anime. Even though it's a clay animation, it's still an animation. I can literally take any anime, let's say Code Geass, and produce it exactly the same anywhere outside of Japan. And because of this, Code Geass will be considered a cartoon, simply because it wasn't made in Japan. And vice versa, I can also take any cartoon, let's say SpongeBob, and produce it in Japan exactly the same, and it would technically be an anime. And this is why the term, or rather the definition of anime, is flawed. When shows like Avatar The Last Airbender is considered a cartoon, but a show like Battle of Clay is considered anime. The problem, however, is more than just the definition, because here's where it gets complicated. Even if we differentiate anime from cartoons by its unique style of animation, the question is, where is the line? At what point does it take for a cartoon to be an anime, and vice versa? This is where we hit a grey area. For example, a cartoon like say Totally Spies. Not that I watch Totally Spies or anything, but a show like Totally Spies seems to have a style a bit similar to anime. And so if we do differentiate it by its unique style, does that make Totally Spies an anime, or is it still a cartoon? And it's because of this that we can't distinct anime from cartoons so easily in terms of definition. So instead, we define it by its country of origin, as before with Japanese cartoons. However, the next problem is what happens when we have more cartoons like Avatar The Last Airbender? What happens when we get more cartoons in the same, if not similar style to anime? How would we differentiate that between cartoons like SpongeBob? And with that said, the definition of anime is flawed because it literally means any animation from Japan, including things like this. And it doesn't help define what an anime is or its characteristics other than it's any form of animation from Japan. However, I guess for the time being, it does work because remember, when I say anime, this comes to mind. And when I say cartoons, this comes to mind. For now, most of the animated shows in the style of anime that we know of is produced in Japan and not really anywhere else, with the exceptions of a few. And so I guess the definition of anime does work as a term for now, but if or when more shows like Avatar The Last Airbender keeps coming out, we're gonna need something more to define anime. This has been the mind of one and all. Let me know in the comments what you think. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you have enjoyed, and I hope to see you again next time.